Political regimes, analogies. Analogously, perhaps, we could compare political regimes with some of the existing diseases. Democracy would be some kind of disease that is not absolutely curable, but bearable and controllable. Say, a flu, a migraine, and even something more serious. However, the severity level of diseases in a democracy would depend a lot on the nature of its rulers. Considering that in some democratic countries, we can see they are so well managed by honest politicians, who, without any fear of reprisals, freely and naturally walk on public roads like any ordinary citizen, earning wages compatible with their positions, without living in abundance, unlike most of other countries which adopted this same kind of political regime. Countries so well managed that, due to their crimes reduction, have converted several of their penitentiaries into hospitals, once the main objective of these public administrators is social welfare. However, when a democratic regime has become corrupted, we can witness true social genocides, with a mitigating corruption's facade, benefiting their responsible genociders with lighter convictions, sentenced by a likewise partial and corrupt judiciary. For the most skeptical ones, the socialist regime would be a cancer and communism its metastasis, definitely incurable. For the believers and religious ones, I once heard a great author write about the difference between devil and demon. He mentioned that in the devil there was still a remnant of love, but that in the demon there was no kind of empathy at all. It is a lost case. In our analogy about political regimes, we could then check that, socialism would be the devil and communism a horrible demon, who will tempt us until the end of times, when salvation will come, and will throw it into the eternal furnace to be consumed. Fortunately, countries ruled by demons are not the majority nowadays, despite the sadness we feel for the citizens from Venezuela, Bolivia, Argentina, North Korea, China, among some others, prohibited of leaving out from these true three-dimensional hells. As a matter of fact, regardless how honest a ruler may be, he will never administer with absolute social justice, because there is no perfect human being on the face of the earth. We are all subject to hatred, discrimination, greed, lust, and all sorts of existing defects within the human ego, and there is no way to dispute this fact within the realist and materialistic sphere. In the Christian scope, the Apostle Paul's letter to the Romans, in its chapter 7, verses 14 to 25, reports on our impossibility of salvation to fight against our human life sins in this world. Only a ruler able to overcome the ego and human nature's weaknesses could use the conscience to administer with social justice without partiality. It is like claiming that only a god can rule in a perfect political regime. It does not mean stating that countries should not have rulers, as it would be much worse, but that a lot of reflection is required, based on ethics, social justice, and love for others, so that a government management is the best possible, using all educational, human, and natural resources that a country can provide to its citizens. Greed causes corruption in politics, ethics and religiosity bring love to others, and consequently, social justice. Corrupt rulers' greed is so much that let them blind to the point of making them truly believe that are hypocritically managing and lying with perfect social justice. The story, about authoritarian conquerors, be they communists, Nazis, fascists, imperialists, etc., talks about genocidal events capable of constraining the devil himself. Genghis Khan, 13th century, 40 million people. He exterminated all who did not accept his idea of a great Mongolian confederation. Men taller than a wooden wheel were killed. Women, the elderly and children became slaves. Entire villages were set on fire. Khan eliminated everyone he encountered along the way, including Chinese, Koreans, and Afghans. Joseph Stalin, a Marxist communist, butchered 27 million between 1930s and 1940s decades. The Russian tyrant adopted a variety of techniques to pursue political rivals. Between 1932 and 1933, for example, he forced Ukraine and Kazakhstan to export all their food, starving natives to death. Entire populations of other countries were displaced and exiled to icy Siberia. After World War II, the dictator demanded that Germans living in territories newly dominated by the Soviet Union, formerly controlled by Hitler, return to their home country. On foot. On the way, entire families were attacked or murdered. Just in Poland, more than 1 million Germans died. Hitler, 20 million. When the world discovered the horror of Nazi concentration camps, the word genocide didn't even exist. Never before, nor since, has a government organized an infrastructure so effective in killing people. Hitler's Germany decimated 6 million Jews and 10.5 million Slavs. He also harassed gays, gypsies, Romanians, and Serbs. Mao Zedong, China, around 45 and 70 million. Between 1958 and 1962, Communist leader Mao Zedong, 1893 to 1976, led the Great Leap Forward, an economic overhaul that intended to turn China into an industrial power, but which ultimately caused a collapse that took at least 40 years. Millions of people dying of hunger. Between 1966 and 1969, a new persecution, the so-called Cultural Revolution, hunted minorities, followers of any religion, and citizens denounced for questioning the regime. The country was filled with concentration camps, and families were forced to pay for the bullet used to kill the convicts. Source: abril.com.br. The communist subversive system, despite not having never dominated the entire world, is very powerful, and possibly, must have, along the times, eliminated several good-intentioned leaders, who diverged from its obscure and murderous principles, as history itself reports, consequently harming many people, who believed in his lying political campaigns to rise to power. When communism reaches a nation's command top, it is almost impossible to remove it, because its commanders-in-chief spare no effort, however destructive they may be, to remain in power, and when they lose it, commit the most terrifying atrocities, in order to retake the government's management at all costs. Only people's majority is capable of definitively overthrowing a murderous and corrupt communist government. However, it is very difficult and complex to unite a nation's citizen, in a bloc, against an authoritarian political regime. Speaking of people's majority, the year was 2018, after an unpredictable Brazilian congressman, with a 7-year mandate between 1991 and 2018, being elected president of Brazil for the 2019 to 2022 term. His 7-year career in the federal legislature was one of intense and frequent protests against all kinds of corruptions and injustices that was already occurring for decades in the three Brazilian governments' federal powers. At a low cost, through social media on the internet, he became popular and managed to get elected without making pacts or alliances with any existing party, and due to this fact, he only named capable and qualified people as ministers. He fired out thousands who were named by the previous government, draining public funds without producing anything. Finally, he cut any and all unnecessary expenses wasted by the country's public vaults. The year is now 2021 and the saga continues. It's been 2.5 years since not even a penny has been extorted from Brazil's public vaults. This president definitely represents a huge threat to public money stealers. The price to be paid for being honest is high, because many important institutions were on the previous corrupt government's payroll, which was forced to leave power. It was no use proving his undeniable points of view and attitudes. The country's most popular medias tried, at all costs, to massacre him. Judiciaries from all spheres, including the Supreme Court, were compromised. The legislative and its leaders were blocking voting on important bills, which would greatly benefit several social issues. The dirtiest initiatives were taken to remove him, who publicly declared that would only leave the presidential seat dead. The popular internet medias proclaimed him as a myth. He dragged millions on the streets to protest against congressmen who betrayed their voters, and above all, the authoritarianism of the Supreme Court trying to make decisions that were going beyond their authority's threshold. From what was found out, through reported cases, voting with electronic ballot boxes was unreliable, and candidates may have been illegally elected. I am a living witness, as I could not vote on this president-elect's party's caption number after several attempts, always returning the message null on the screen. I finally found a way to circumvent that fraud and voted in another way, without accepting what the machine was forcing me to do. By these times, the fight between the Brazilian executive power, the Superior Electoral Court, the Supreme Court, and the Legislative Assembly is the implantation of auditable electronic voting machines, having the executive lost the voting for an auditable electronic ballot during the legislative plenary. The way I think, no elected candidates are bigger than the people who have elected them. I guess this issue is not solved yet. Against all odds, the brave president has not lost hope and continues to fight. Movements and more popular movements take place with a certain frequency, and it is still unpredictable who will be the winner in this contest. This Brazilian president's image was also quite denigrated internationally by the media, and with relative success, as only those whom live in Brazil and those whom seek to follow the news through diverse communication sources may understand what is true and what is a liar about this true democracy's warrior. I believe that, for the foreign public, what most denigrated the current president of Brazil's image was apart the Amazon forests burning, shortly after he assumed his presidential term. These were ridiculous accusations, which even involved Pope Francis, criticizing an event that naturally takes place every year in various parts of the Amazon rainforest, but he did not say a single word of protest against the Venezuelan people's massacres by the President Maduro's authoritarianism, right aside where the Amazon forest was burning routinely and naturally. The world needs to know that the foreign country's interests in the Amazon are directly related to its mineral wealth, fauna, and flora, obscurely negotiated by previous Brazilian governments, through fraudulent transactions, including the illegal mineral and trees extraction, strictly controlled nowadays by the current federal government and its administrators. Even more ridiculous was when the Brazilian president was labeled as a genocider, unduly being pointed that he did not want to buy the COVID-19 vaccine. The mainstream media relentlessly spread this lie and omitted the fact that, in addition of having to sign the vaccine contract purchase with the manufacturer, it was necessary to wait for the Congress approval the bill, otherwise the president could be impeached. Additionally, after all bureaucracy cleared the vaccine purchase, its manufacturer demanded to be exempted of any responsibility for the drug's side effects. This is one more truth that needs to go beyond Brazilian borders so that the whole world is aware of this as a fact. The real genociders were some governors and mayors, who embezzled billions of dollars distributed by the federal government, instead of buying supplies needed for emergency care for those most affected by the COVID-19 virus. Many have died as a result of this criminal act by governors and mayors. The frustrated attempt to assassinate the president of Brazil, still during his presidential campaign, has evidenced the despair of the government that has preceded him, and the consequences of what would happen after he's being elected, when the trillions of dollars in corruption scandals from several public and private sectors would emerge. Walant Froli, author. The Death of Sin and the Human Nature. The Humankind Project's Best Leftovers. The Story's History.